Anybody remember? Anybody know what I'm referring to when I talk about the whiz kids? Pardon? Yeah, Robert does. Thank you. Whiz kids. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, Ford Motor Company assembled a leadership team under Lee Iacocca, and Robert McNamara Jr. was one of the principals of that, and they were the leadership team at Ford Motor Company. They were responsible ultimately for the Mustang and for a variety of products that did very well for Ford Motor Company. Several of them left Ford Motor Company and went into the administration under Lyndon Johnson, but the Whiz Kids were a pretty sharp bunch, or so I was told. They had a unique system, not really unique, but one that they did a lot of work with, and that is that their meetings, I'm told, were largely raucous. That there were ideas, there were arguments, there were all sorts of things percolating, and then as it came to the end of the meeting, they actually were able to come to some conclusions, and Mr. McNamara and Mr. Iacocca were pulling it all together to deal with that. And that sort of collaborative work is largely lost today. That sort of example of two brains or four brains or six brains being better than one is largely a thing of history. Now, in our pride, I know better than anybody else, and I'm not going to listen to anyone else. But when you look at the history of humanity, there's a very long history of leadership depending on, you ready? Wise men, magi. And the actual origin of the term magi goes back to Persia, and it was they who really created this. The book of Daniel, a lot of what Daniel did was as a magi in Babylon. And these were scholars and thinkers and those who looked at life and who tried to understand what was happening and to give wisdom, sage advice to leadership. So, when we translated the Old Testament and the New Testament into English, the Magi became kings. Now, the kings were not really kings in the sense of a political authority, but they were kings in the sense of an informational authority. But truly, they were better known as magi or wise men. And so the church celebrates on the 6th of January the Feast of the Epiphany. And if you look at the outline that I handed out, the Eastern Church, the Orthodox Church, uses it as the date of Jesus' baptism. The Western Church, since the 4th century, uses it as the coming of the Magi to Bethlehem, the wise men. So, you know the text in Matthew that we're working on. So, there we go. Matthew 2:2. saying, "Where is he who was born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him." Now, here's what I want to look at. I want to look at the whole concept of magi. I want to look at the issue of pursuing, and I want to look at the conclusion of worship. So, the magi. Matthew 2, 1 and 2. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Now I highlighted a part of that because this is the highlighted is the in blue. For we saw his star. Now, note a couple of things. They were not Israelites. They came from afar, right? And likely Persia to the east. Number two, we saw his star. Now, think about that for a moment. How would they know? Okay, they could be astronomers and they see a new light in the sky. That makes a lot of sense. But how would they know any connection to Israel or Judea? And the answer to that is because of their study, because of their work that they had done. So, we saw the star. Okay, there's your physical. But what is behind it is this. Number one, they were paying attention to the world in which they lived. Now, I suspect that they had ordinary routines that they were engaged in the kingdom of Persia. In other words, they had a regular day job. But even in that, they were paying attention to the big picture. They were looking around them and saying, what's going on in the world in which I live? What's happening in the world in which I'm a part of? Second of all, they had a knowledge background. In other words, they knew history. They knew sacred writings. They knew the things that people were talking about. They were informed about the whole history and understanding of the world and the place that they live in. And so the paying attention in the moment is built upon the foundation of collective wisdom, of collective knowledge. And so the facts and the things that underlay what they observed were this whole reservoir, if you will, of human knowledge. And it was their responsibility and privilege to be aware of what was going on. Now, just as one example of that, for us, the appearance of a star probably doesn't mean anything other than, wow, a new discovery. But in the ancient world, there frequently were celestial events that marked significant historical events. In other words, something great in history happened, and there was some sort of corresponding celestial identification that went with it. And so the birth of a king would not be at all unusual for them to recognize a star. So they see the star, and they immediately would ask the question, where's the king? Or what does this star represent? Because in their learning and in their understanding, there was this long historical connection to that. So that knowledge base underlay their power of observation. And then there's a third piece to what they saw, which was the issue of curiosity. And so because they were responsible for understanding what was happening in the nation, in the world, they had a curiosity to pursue. And so that curiosity caused them to undertake all of the things that will transpire in Matthew chapter 2. But here's the point that I want you to take from this. Wise men are paying attention, have a knowledge base, and have a curiosity to integrate the past and the present for the sake of the future. In 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verses 32, of Issachar, men who had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do, 200 chiefs and all their kinsmen under their command. Issachar is what? What's that designating? Who are men of Issachar? Issachar is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And so when you go and you look at the tribes of Israel, the sons of Jacob, Judah and Dan and Naphtali, Issachar is one of the sons. So the tribe of Issachar is set apart, is recognized as having people who had understanding of the times. They were the Magi. They were, now, in any large family, different children play different roles. It's just a natural consequence. In any large family or in any group that's tight, you know that different people play different functions and they have different reputations. And so within the family of Jacob, within the children of Israel, Issachar is set apart for its understanding of what we ought to do. Esther chapter 1, verse 13. Then the king said to the Magi, who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and judgment. So in Babylon, in Esther's time, there were set apart specialists. These happened to be versed in law and in judgment. This is that second level of understanding of the history. And so that's where we go to get our answers to tough questions. Now, I want to separate for you some particular terms. Knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it into a fruit salad. Understanding is much deeper than knowledge. There are many people who know us, but very few who understand us. So, here's the three terms. Knowledge is fact-based. In other words, there's a piece of data that is the foundation of our knowledge. The carpet is blue, okay? That's a fact. You can observe it, you can see it, you can measure it. Understanding, on the other hand, has to do with context. Understanding is bigger than the fact. Understanding puts it into the world, if you will, in which we live. And so we may know the fact, but we don't know how to apply it. We don't know how it fits into the larger context of our existence. But understanding is the next step up from knowledge. And then the third step up is wisdom, which is, now that I know what the fact is, and now that I know how it fits into the context, what do I do with it? How do I use it effectively? How do I live it effectively? And all of the book of Proverbs, for example, is founded on application, living out the understanding of the knowledge that God has provided. And so these three words, they're close, and we use them frequently interchangeably, but the reality is that they each have a different and very important nuance for our understanding. That the knowledge is fact-based, the understanding is context-based, and wisdom is application. So, magi, wise men, they're people who understand the times. They get the context, and from Esther, they know how to make good decisions. They know what is the best choice for us to make in terms of the options that are available to us. Second thing about the Magi is what they knew, they acted upon. So they saw the star, and, they're probably sitting around and say, wow, something big has happened. What happens next? They don't just say, okay, put a note in the journal that the star appeared. They follow. So, Matthew 2, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him, and assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet Micah, Old Testament. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who shall shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, that I too may come and worship him. After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where Jesus was. Now, most important in that, they saw the star, and then they got up and went. They saw the star, they tried to grasp, to put it into its context, but then they did not sit on their Barcalounger and watch the game. They got up and they went because it mattered to them to understand the sign. It mattered to them to know what this was about, what was happening, why it was happening, how it was happening. And so they went and did. Ben Franklin, the Constitution only guarantees you the right to pursue happiness. You have to catch it yourself. To pursue, to overtake, to recover. They saw, they got up, they went, they engaged in this whole process of discovery. They didn't say, oh, I'm too busy. Oh, I have too much to do. This is going to slow down my other projects. They saw, they got up, they went to find what was happening. Your capacity to receive is based on your hunger to pursue. I have no idea who Mike Bickle is, but that's a great quote. In every part of our life, what we are prepared to receive, is really built on our willingness to pursue. It's really built on my desire to know. And if I don't have any desire to know, then I can be quite content to sit on the couch and let life stream by. But it's all rooted in essence in what I want to know and what my desire is in that. Which means that when Psalm 37:4 says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. If you don't care, if you're apathetic, if it doesn't matter to you, then life will pass by. But if we delight ourselves in the Lord, he honors that. James 4:2, you desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have. But notice that even though we're not asking, we still have the desire. And that's where the issue of that pursuit comes into play, is what moves us from the desire to the accomplishment is our willingness to actually do something about it. James 1:4 and 5. But each man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. You come equipped from the factory with a major fountain of desires. You possess this major source of desire. And beloved, it comes in every way, shape, or form. The desire may be for fame. The desire may be for fortune, for money and possessions. The desire may be for power or prestige. The desire may be to be known in some way. But all of us, every human being, has a desire reactor within us that constantly churns out things that we want. How many people have gone to the store, any store, and they're walking down the aisle and they see something and they go, wow, I want that. Did they want it in the car? No. They never knew it existed in the car. But when they saw it, they want it. Because that's the nature of our humanity, is that desire. And so what is it? We cannot escape the desire. We cannot escape the reality that we are creatures who are created by God with a desire. But here's the essence of our great challenge. God created us with this capacity so that we would desire him, desire our relationship with him, desire our fellowship with him. As Carl was talking about in testimony, the joy of rolling around on the floor with his children. And without that desire, that would never happen. The problem is that all sin is rooted here in James 1 of misdirecting that desire. The problem is not the desire itself, it's the way in which the desire is satisfied. And the root of all sin is the manipulation and the destruction of the intentionality of the desire that God created for you. You with me? Sin is the diversion of godly desire to an inappropriate end. The pursuit of the star and of the knowledge and of the information and of the understanding drove them. And then the great conclusion of this story is when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy, and going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts and gold and frankincense and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Merriam-Webster's definition of worship in the 1848 volume said, worship is to honor with extravagant love and extreme submission. Worship is to honor with extravagant love and extreme submission. This morning, in the men's Bible study, looking at Not a Fan, the wife says to the husband, well, what happens about all things in moderation? She's mad at him, wants him to change his attitude, thinks he's becoming fanatical. And so she said, what about moderation? So my question is, what about moderation in to honor with extravagant love and extreme submission? Is there any moderation there? No. No. Because that's the culmination of the desire that God created us to enjoy in his presence. Matthew 4:10, thus then Jesus saith unto him, get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Matthew 4 is, what's the context? The temptation of Jesus, right? The beginning of his earthly ministry. He encounters Satan, and Satan takes him into the wilderness and is going to prove him. And Jesus says to Satan, get behind me. For the only source, the only focus of real worship ought to be God. Not our looks, not our bank account, not our Facebook account, not our Twitter followers. Why? Well, because back in Exodus, God said, Exodus chapter 20, otherwise known as the Ten Commandments, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. At the top of the priority list, at the top of our list as to what is important in our lives, ought to be Jesus Christ. Romans 12:1. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Now, what's God asking? The whole package. To present your bodies, the whole package. It's not 90 minutes on Sunday morning. It's not a check in the offering plate. It's not a round of duty in the warming center or someplace else. God is saying, that if you truly want to worship me, if you truly want to honor me, then every single thing that you are is given over to my use. Worship. Personal checkup for the moment. You ready? Worship begins with exceedingly great joy. Right? Isn't that what Matthew 2 said? They saw Jesus and they worshiped and they were exceedingly great joy. Notice that it is in seeing Jesus that that joy is created. It's in seeing the awesome goodness that God has done. So I just ask you to look in the mirror. Your exceedingly great joy. Number two, they fell down. What does that mean? In their case, literally, they prostrated themselves on the ground because in ancient culture, that was the sign of homage. That was the sign of honoring. What it means is that they let go of their pride. They let go of their self-image. They let go of their prerogatives and the things that were important to them. And they said, it doesn't matter. You're Jesus. And I give it all. Many years ago, Gary and I were in India, and I had finished teaching and really nice church in Vellore. And I'd finished, I was standing at the front, and this man came running out of the congregation at me. And that created a little insecurity on my part. And he actually dove to grab my feet. Now, in all honesty, it creeped me out. But what he was doing was honoring me. Wasn't what I wanted. I tried to pick him up and he wouldn't let go. Because for him, it was his attempt to express his gratitude and his devotion for what had just happened. Now, I'm going, wait, dude, cut this out. This isn't my gig. And he wanted none of it. Because for him, to fall down and to embrace was the greatest evidence that he could muster of his appreciation and his thanks. When's the last time you expressed that gratitude anywhere? Then the third thing is they offered gifts. They offered gifts. Frankincense, gold, myrrh, important stuff. But the point of it is that in worship, one gives. So often in the history of the church, people have said to me in various contexts, well, I don't get anything out of worship. And the reality is, you're not supposed to. Worship is about you giving honor and glory to God and giving everything that you possess to Him because of the greatness and the goodness of who He is. But when I say I didn't get anything out of worship, what I'm saying is worship is about me. Worship is about what I want. Worship is about making me feel better. And beloved, it simply is not the essence of worship. Although, the extravagant love of self, yeah, that's reality. And that's why I worship myself. But they offered to the baby, they offered to the king gifts, tangible, real evidence of their devotion. And so, there's worship. What am I willing to give God? Romans 12. Present your bodies as living sacrifices, which is your spiritual worship. So, it's all rooted in 3 simple acts. Number 1, I have to choose. I have to say I'm going to do this. All of this started with them paying attention, right? I don't pay attention. I don't care. I'm too busy gazing at my navel. I'm too busy, enthralled with my selfie. I have to choose what I'm going to be focused upon. I have to choose where my life is headed and what is important to me. I have to choose what I read, what I hear, what I listen to, what I engage in. I have to make those intentional choices because Satan and the rest of the world is going to inundate you with every sort of choice to defer or to deflect you from doing what is best. You have millions upon millions of options as to how to fill your mind, how to occupy your time, how to waste your financial resources, and how to entertain your soul. You have to make the choice as to what I'm going to invest in. The wise men were invested in understanding the moment, in seeing the star, in finding the gift that God had blessed humanity with. The second thing is that it requires action. Faith, life is not a spectator sport. Sorry. Action. You have to desire. You have to make the effort to change something. Doing the same thing in the same way and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. I think it's Einstein. And so we have to act, and it means that I have to change. And, the action may be very simple. I have to get up. It may mean that I have to fall down, not at Westbourne. It may mean that I have to spend my time in a different way. It may mean that I'm going to cut out and give up something. But I have to act. I can't just talk about it. I can't just think about it. Get off the pot. Third thing is offer. The third thing is that I have to give myself. See, when the young man asked Jesus, what's the great commandment? He says, love the Lord your God with all of your heart and soul and strength. That is not thinking good thoughts about the Lord your God. That is not singing nice songs about how wonderful God is. To love the Lord your God means that I do what is best for God without regard to the personal cost. Anybody remember our ancient definition of love? You just heard it. To love is to do for the other what is best for them without regard to my personal cost. That's love that Jesus is talking about. And then Jesus says, just to add insult to injury, to love, same word, your neighbor as yourself. No offering, no worship. No offering, no love. So the wise men, strangers, foreigners, outside of the covenant of grace, understood the times, they saw the sign, they pursued the understanding of it, and when they saw the child, when they saw Jesus, they worshiped and gave their gifts. What do you see?